welcome to you if this is your very first time listening to Inspired Coach podcast, or welcome back if you are a regular listener. It's wonderful to have you here with us today. We have an inspirational interview for you with an incredible human being on an incredibly important topic, one that I actually think is gaining in its level of importance for us to not only talk about, but address in increasing measure. So let me tell you more about our incredible guest today. It is Caroline Kell, who is a proud Mbarbrum woman born and raised on Kulin Lands. Caroline is the founder and managing director of Blak, Wattle Coaching and Consulting, and a former counsellor and executive director who is deeply passionate about the social and emotional well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Caroline has extensive policy design and community engagement experience working across governments, community health services, and in therapeutic environments as well. And she has a passion for driving long-term outcomes in regards to treaty, truth-telling treaty, health and mental health reforms. Caroline is a bold and conscious trauma-informed leader, facilitator, thinker, and she is also a current Beautiful You Coaching Academy trainee. We are delighted to be able to have her in our learning environments and also as a future alumni of the Beautiful You Coaching Academy. Caroline is specifically here today to talk to us about the topic of burnout, which is something that she is incredibly passionate about and actually delivered a TEDx talk on just last year. In this episode, we are going to be specifically talking about how to look at and address burnout as a coach. Because yes, folks, just in case you're maybe not aware, you can burn out from doing something that you love. And in fact, there is a particular part of this episode with Caroline who is so incredibly grounded and expert in this area that might shock you. And that is about the fact that if you are in a helping profession, it might not necessarily be a case of if you experience burnout, but when. And so that makes this an incredibly important topic for us to talk about. I know that you are going to learn so much from Caroline's passion, energy, expertise, and just the education and information that she can offer in this realm. So enjoy this episode ahead, and I hope that you are able to lean in really considerably to the wonderful tips and information that Caroline shares about how you can recognize, address, and minimize burnout for yourself. Caroline Kell, welcome to Inspired Coach Podcast. I am delighted to have you as our guest today.
Oh, thank you, Julie. It's always lovely to connect with you and share any of your space and energy. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am delighted that you are here because I have no doubt that you are going to be able to share some very special sacred medicine today with people who really need to hear that right now and or may at some time in the future. We're here to talk about burnout. And I only shared something recently on social media a few months ago about the fact that I think that this is going to become an increasingly important topic of conversation and issue within the entrepreneurial space, and that it might in fact sneak up on a lot of us and take us by surprise as to something that we need to manage and deal with. Caroline, I know that burnout is something for you as a former counsellor, as a coach, a consultant in your amazing First Nations focused business that is deeply important to you. And I'd love to just start out by asking you, why is that? Where does this passion for talking about and educating and supporting people in the realm of burnout come from?
It's such a great question. Yeah, I think my first sort of experience with burnout really occurred in 2020 during the pandemic. I was working as an executive director. I had about 25 staff. We were right in the thick of the pandemic. And I think that there's a few sort of cumulative factors which sort of really created a breeding ground for my burnout at that stage. One, which we know, is personality type. So people who have perfectionistic tendencies, who are highly sensitive, who identify or self-actualize with their role. And for me, working in for community was such a huge part of who I was and is and am. The high responsibility that I had for the staff, myself, communities, my families. And I guess if I'm being really upfront, just some of the workplace practices really hadn't matured enough to acknowledge burnout and traumas and stresses that many of our people are experiencing. And so at the end of 2020, I hit a really, really prolonged period of chronic stress. I took about 3 months off as a bit of a spiritual maintenance and had an existential crisis. And I guess it gave me the time and clarity to really stop back and sort of see what's happening in the social conditions systemically that are leading people to burnout, and especially in our industries where we're coaches or healers or community members, and we are experienced high levels of trauma and vicarious traumas and complex and systemic traumas. So for me, it was kind of my first experience. But after sort of scratching the surface deeper, I realized that I've had this high propensity to burnout for such a long time. It comes back to my really early formative years, I think. So yeah, that's kind of what led me on this path. The other thing is, last year I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, lupus, which attacks basically your organs, start to attack your tissues. And this was during the time where we were really deep in talking about, the mind, body, holistic connection of stress and how it manifests. And I think really living this, walking this, learning this journey, it is kind of what creates this passion in me to really just talk about it and build some awareness and some psychoeducation or some education around this for our communities.
Well, I am so glad that you are talking about it, and it is something that we are talking about more. I have experienced burnout before. It just happens to have been 20 years ago when I was at the tail end of my social work career and starting my business as a private therapist and a coach. And honestly, I didn't know what was happening to me. And it was not a pleasant time in my life at all. And it took a really long time to recover from. And you do realize once you've had one experience of it that yes, that propensity for it to happen again is very, very much there, and you have to be so mindful of yourself. And I think we're going to talk about some more of those things as coaches and entrepreneurs as we move forward. But one of the things I want to make sure that everyone knows, Caroline, is that you have taken this personal experience of burnout that you've had, and you have really moved into the psychoeducation space, because last year you delivered a TEDx talk specifically talking about First Nations burnout and the cultural and collective load that comes with that. Can you tell us a little bit more about the specific things that you see with First Nations burnout and why it's so important that that be addressed in a very specific and unique way? We are all individuals, of course, but there is a collective experience that's happening here that's so important that we all be aware of.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I just want to acknowledge how much generosity and support that you provided during that TEDx time, because it was an incredible milestone, and I don't think many of us would have felt as brave had we had not people like yourself there. So Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. It was for myself and Joe Parker, who is our senior trainer here at the Beautiful You Coaching Academy. This was a passion project of ours. There will be another TEDx Cecil Street coming up, and it was our honour when you submitted. We were like, oh, yes, we need that talk. We need this talk to be in the zeitgeist. We need it out there, and you were the perfect person to deliver it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. An incredible honour to take up a space like that. And you and Joe were just phenomenal. So thank you. Yeah, I guess, that was a huge moment in really taking this to, I guess, a mainstream audience. A lot of the conversations, a lot of our mindset at Blak Wattle are really around critical conversations and not critical mass, and really holding space for brave and vulnerable and meaningful yarn. So to get that opportunity to talk about this in the mainstream discourse was a huge honour. But I guess to your question, so what is burnout? And as I sort of touched and alluded in the TEDx talk, it's a really misunderstood phenomena. It is categorized by three distinct things. The first is an emotional exhaustion, so that depletion where we feel heavy in our minds, our bodies, our spirits, memory and foggy, and just a malaise, I guess, for a prolonged period of time. Secondly is a depersonalization, which is a detachment from our thought and body processes. So a lack of empathy. And we see this a lot with even my own experience as a counsellor in, say, social work or counselling, or when we're nervous system to nervous system working with individuals in the helping professions, where we might start to look and view these people as, cases and stories instead of people and human experiences. So we start to see a lack of empathy. And the last is a diminished sense of personal accomplishment. So this kind of what's the point feeling. Interestingly, there's been a sort of mindset that has been adopted, which was really given birth through the Industrial Revolution and colonization, where it was really the individual's burden not to be able to manage their own stress. But we know that there are many interrelated factors to why people experience stress in a workforce, and predominantly that comes down to the safety or the quality of your interpersonal relationships. So when we look at burnout for First Nations people, what we also what we see when we look at this is that there are really key links between burnout, its relationship with stress, and its relationship with traumas. And what we see with our communities is sort of three sort of key factors or things that we theorize. Of course, there is a lack of evidence around this topic across the board, but particularly for marginalised and First Nations people. And that is what we see as, one, we are generally caring for more people more often. We have huge cultural and kinship and family structures, which means our proximity to our families and communities who are having tough times is just far more greater than the non-Aboriginal person. The other factor that we see is that many of our mob, while we are a really strong and resilient and proud people, a resourceful people, many of us have high levels of psychological distress, and that is perpetuated by what we call the social determinants of health, such as racism, discrimination, microaggressions, aggressions, not access to employment, housing, all of these sort of factors which create psychological distress, ill mental health, and then an inability to regulate emotions and to have a high propensity to experience stress or the effects of stress. So we see this sort of coupled in, that we're caring for more people and we're exposed to more stresses more often. And so for us, the definition of burnout becomes a lot wider in scope because of that non-traditional role that we play, but also that many of us have a predisposition to chronic stress and chronic illness, which, as I've started to do a lot of this work, I think I'm starting to really challenge even my own bias in this, which is that perhaps it's not the load of the collective or the responsibility, because we do get a sense of self from that. I think it's more the load of the colony, or the conditions in the colony that create us to be so unwell. And in fact, the collective load is and culture, and the cultural load is really more of a protective factor than anything. So that's kind of in a nutshell, but it's such a complex topic. Yes. How long have we got?
Yeah, I know. It certainly is a complex topic, as it should be, because these things are incredibly nuanced. There is nothing about this that is hard and fast, or where there are easy answers or an easy control or understanding of exactly what it is that is happening. And of course, we're talking about individual people amongst all of this. But I'm so grateful to you for sharing all of that, Caroline, because there are many, many golden nuggets within there. But the one thing that I am really taking away from what you're saying there, it's something that I've known, but I hope that everyone else listening knows this now too, is that while we experience as a human being burnout at an individual level, no matter how we might identify as a human being, there are collective and systemic influences and oppressions that make this something that can be significantly worse and significantly contributed to. We don't experience burnout in an isolated box. There are factors that influence this, from dysfunctional workplaces to traumatic family histories to interpersonal relationships that are, as you've mentioned, touched by aggressions, racism, microaggressions, transphobia, homophobia, so many different, fat phobia, so many different things that may impact us on as a human being. Caroline, I'd love to ask you, because so many people that I have talked to who have experienced burnout often struggle to recognize the early warning signs, or just the warning signs, or even the symptoms that they have it, until things have progressed to a point where they're quite urgent and help and treatment is needed in a more significant way. Could you please tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that this is really important for all of the coaches or coaches-to-be who are listening right now, because you might recognize some things here, either in yourself, in people that you love, or maybe even in your clients. It does not necessarily mean that you have to rush out and do something about it, but education about this and awareness about it is key to be able to support yourself or someone else well.
Yeah, really great question. And you're right. I think, as you mentioned before, Julie, that, once we do find ourselves in a state of burnout, the notion that we can take a week off or go on a weekend trip and just get better is not accurate at all. It's actually needs a really concerted effort and a long period of time to really get our nervous system back to its homeostasis and back into our sympathetic nervous system. It takes a long time, a lot of treatment, a lot of support. And so understanding the early warning signs is really, really critical. The way that we talk about the relationship between stress, trauma, and burnout at Blak Wattle is really around the dorsal vagal, polyvagal theory, rather. And our body does give us a lot of early warning signs when it comes to stress. The challenge is we're too busy writing emails or responding to calls to even listen to what our body is actually telling us. And I know this to be true with an autoimmune condition myself. It's a prolonged period of stress, hormones that have just manifested within my body. But I guess physiologically, what you might see if you're feeling quite stressed, generally pains in the body, so tightening of the jaw, just sort of pains throughout the body. We can see instances where we might get frail in our nails, frail in our hair. Our sleep and appetite will generally change. They're generally the first couple of things to happen when we're not in a state of rest and digest, or our nervous system is in a state of panic or fear or worry. What happens with the animal when they're under stress is they get rid of all of the organs, the reproductive system, the ability to rest and digest. And so it's just in that fight or flight mode. So, appetite might change. I think also too, what we see a lot is when we're in the sort of acute stress phase is those initially is changes within our relationships. We might be more agitated. We might withdraw. We might have a sense of apathy. And we can stay in this sort of fight or flight stage for some time. Our bodies are pretty good at managing periods of stress. But when we don't address that period, we go into what's called the freeze or the total shutdown. And you might notice that is a total disassociation. So you're just kind of a shell in your own life, a numbness, a depression, a lethargy, this sense of helplessness, shame, shutdown, just this kind of feeling of feeling trapped. And in those instances, people become less inclined to be help seeking, and they withdraw entirely from relationships or positive social interactions and other things that generally keep them well. So we do have really early warning signs, and usually, it shows up in our body. Most times it will show up in our relationships. I think the key is, how do we as people and societies find time, make time to get clarity and really check in with our emotional state and name it and normalize it and, talk about what we're truly feeling, because the world isn't going to slow down at any time. Oh, trust me, I've tried.
Oh, Caroline, really? Oh.
It would be lovely. But we need to find ways to really build this into our work and our practice on a really daily, hourly, weekly basis. I think it's Stacey Jordan Sheldon. She says that, getting free from some of this is a process, but, staying free is a practice. And we really have to come at this work most days, and even on the days when we're not feeling stressed.
Yeah, I want to dive in and talk about this more, a bit from a practical aspect, but something I just really want to pick up, because I know that there are so many coaches and people who are desiring to be coaches that listen to this podcast, and that is to ask you the question, because it's related. I know the answer to this question and I know what you're about to say, but I just think it's really important for everybody to hear, because when you were talking about things, such as that disassociation and even earlier, the lack of empathy, I remember that happening to me as a social worker who, if you'd have told me a mere couple of years beforehand, you will reach a point in your work where you will start to question whether you even care about your clients and what you do, I would have thrown daggers at you and said, that is offensive to me. That is so upsetting. I would have become so defensive and upset about it, not realizing that it is 100% an illness. It is something that can happen, not because you are broken or that you don't have a wonderful heart and you're not great at what you do, but that it is genuinely a part of the experience. And so it is possible, isn't it, to burn out from doing something that you love. And it is very possible for somebody who is passionate about what they do and people and being in service to burnout as well, to a point of WTF. Like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first sort of understanding of burnout was from a German psychologist in 1974, and he actually coined it the people helping people syndrome. I mean, so people who are working in helping professions, doctors, lawyers, social workers, health practitioners, anyone who's in an active service, I don't want to be alarmist, but sometimes it's not a question of if we will burn out. It's a question of when we will burn out. You know, a lot of the science, and I'm sure you know this in your practice and around the relationship with vicarious trauma, for instance, and it gets coined compassion fatigue and burnout, but they really are different. So we know the way that we're built as human beings, we're a wonderful creature, deeply flawed, but an old, hard drive, I guess you could say. And we just know that our amygdalas, so the middle part of our brains, when we are sharing a story with someone, we have the ability to not only feel what they are saying, but to go on that journey, to think about our own experiences. And that can bring up so much for ourselves. And so anyone who's working in this space with that proximity to people, sometimes it's not a question of if, it's a question of sort of when. And that's why we as, you know, people and coaches and counselors absolutely have to have non-negotiables and walk the talk if you're going to be holding space for people and looking after themselves. It's interesting too, I think when we look at burnout, when we have a proximity to the thing that we love, it creates so much more self-actualization, you know, that innermost sort of desire and value and passion and how we view ourselves within the world. And so, of course, that can lead us to experience burnout as well. Yeah. There's a few things that we've sort of come across in our research by Dr. Gordon Parker. He's a Professor Dr. Gordon Parker, who is at the Black Dog Institute. He helped us develop the survey that was really instrumental in the TED Talk. And he talks a lot about, you know, there's obviously, as we've identified, the social conditions, the systemic, the workforce, how we view work as people and societies. You know, we still have this mindset that in order to be worthy and successful, we have to sort of grossly overwork to accumulate more wealth and status and power. So these things are really evolutionarily hardwired. Like, we were all plucked out of families and communities and put in factories and workplaces. But he talks a lot about personality types as well that are prone to burnout. As I mentioned before, people who have a high propensity to be maybe more tougher on themselves or harder on themselves, the perfectionistic, people who are overachievers, also people who are really amiable people, believe it or not. So people who really struggle to assert their boundaries or to have healthy critical conversations, people who are just the go with the flow people, also have a relationship with burnout. And what's really fascinating when I look at it through that discourse, it's like, okay, cool. Well, just, you know, go away and learn how to say no or put in a boundary. But we know, you know, we all know that, you know, the way that we show up in our adult lives is often coping mechanisms that have served us, protective factors that have served us, that relate to our former experiences, our socialization, how we were treated as a young person. And so it can be really hard to change that notion to want to show up a certain way. I know with my practice in doing this work, I've spent, years, if not years, in deep counselling around this belief that I have. And I know exactly where it all comes from. It comes from being in a large Black family with 6 kids, that I have to be a big girl. I've got to get it done. And that being a part of a big family, we all had a role, but I was the second youngest. And so I didn't want to I never wanted to rock the boat. My caregivers were pretty unpredictable as well. And so for me, I was just like, no, I'll just do it all, get it done. I'm a big girl. Of course, that manifests in my adult life of being someone who wants to not rock the boat at workplace, so take on more, or be somebody who doesn't want to have conflict, or so all of these behaviors and why we show up in this way in the workforce is all really deeply related to our former years. And so it can be a lot of time and effort and energy to kind of move through that.
Yeah. It sure can. And thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, Caroline. I would like to finish up today by talking about some of these non-negotiables that you have mentioned. And so for any coach that is out there right now that is, they're building your business, or maybe you have built it and are experiencing a level of success, whatever it is that may mean to you, because we come at success here at Beautiful You as that's something that means different things to different people. And it's certainly not just financially related, that's for sure. What are the things that we can do to try to, if not completely avoid burnout, because I think I agree with you. In fact, I do agree with you that we're all going to experience at least touches of it in some form, not necessarily a full-on blowout of it, where we're really, really unwell and have to seek extensive treatment. But I do think all of us will experience touches of it, at least in some form, in our coaching careers as people who are helping people. What are some of the things that we can do to try and nurture, nourish, non-negotiable ourselves in life and business that can really help us to try and lessen the impact of what may happen to us, whether it's happening now or whether it might be something that we need to be more acutely aware of in the future?
Yeah, really great question. And I guess I'll just touch on what you already have, which, the journey of healing or healing from mental health challenges is unique to the individual. And of course, it varies in person to person. So there really is no one size fits all. And I think when we look at what are our non-negotiables, while it might not totally eradicate those prolonged periods of stress in our lives, or the stresses that are coming at us thick and fast, when we do nurture ourselves, we can see a reduction of the symptoms I guess a reduction overall. So we can't completely eradicate the condition, but I guess there's a few non-negotiables that I would sort of think about. And the way that we really look at this at our work, given our community of First Nations, we talk about this as small daily promises. We know that for blackfellas in the colony, it can be really hard to find places and spaces where they actually feel safe. And so when they do have that moment, it might be 10 minutes in between a meeting where they've got a song playing, or, sitting out the back with a cup of tea. When we find that we get into our homeostasis just for a moment to regroup, recalibrate, that sometimes can just be enough for us. So because we are always in a state of chronic stress in the colony, we like to look at this as small daily promises. So what is the small thing that you have already done to manage stresses in your life? The other thing that I will say is that we take a really holistic approach to managing stress, because stress is in theory activated in our mind, but it is stored in our body through our parasympathetic nervous system. And so I guess a few tips. First is, if you're a healer and you're a coach, or you're working in a help-seeking profession and you don't have a healer, or you don't have a coach, or you don't have a community of care, then you are doing yourself and your clients a total disservice. You need a space where you can get clarity, check in with your behaviors and triggers and insights just as much as your clients do. So, we always recommend that we take a treatment approach to this first because, as I say, getting out for a walk won't eradicate stress, but it will help. But with treatment and care and a community of care around you, you can see a reduction of your symptoms. The other thing that we see within the context of burnout particularly is that burnout is really, as I mentioned, stored stress in the body. And so the head talks thought, but the body talks movement. It needs a way to get out all of the stress, like the gazelle in the wild, getting away from the lion that's coming. And so the research sort of says that we should move for 30 minutes a day, however we can. And as I mentioned to you off air before we started, I made a promise to myself 3 years ago that I was going to try my best with kindness to move my body most days. And I didn't prescribe going to a gym or, climbing a mountain. I just said most days, in order to look after myself, I'm going to move my body. And so for me, it's, putting on Beyonce or Lizzo and dancing. It's, taking my dogs out on country for a walk. I've got a community of care through my gym. It's a group of women that I go to, move through all the stress in my body. But I've also got positive social interactions there, which is another key factor into managing burnout. So treatment, body work, however you can to get into your body, out of the heady, into the body. Positive social interactions. We are humans. We need each other to survive. Burnout is not about us self-caring. It's about more of us caring for more of each other more often. And so where can you find a community of care to go into some of these routines and rituals with? What values and boundaries do you have with the not so helpful people in your life? And how can you be mindful of the energy or the load that they may take up? So positive social interactions is key. And our two other sort of things which we like to do is in relation to our mind, which is getting clarity to just check in with ourselves most days. Me and my team do this thing when we say, what's coming up for me today? What am I feeling? What can I give myself? What might I need from others? And just to sort of normalize checking in with ourselves and giving ourselves that space to be open and expansive to our emotions. And of course, the last key, which, is a skill or an art, I guess, that I'm learning. It's something that terrified me at first, is just the power of connecting to our breath. It is the oldest computer we've got within us. And so if we are finding that we are aroused or in a stressful situation, returning to breath can be a really great way to de-escalate that stressor in the moment so that it doesn't have those other ramifications over time. But it can be a short breath, a deep breath. We do a breath work just very simply for our community where we get them to pretend like they're blowing out a candle. And just to slowly ease into that practice, because we know that if people are really heightened, it can be very hard for us to stop and go inwards. So they're, I guess, our main tips, but it looks very different for everyone else. For our community too, is we have the beautiful benefits of these 80,000 years of knowledge and science. So country, connection, ceremony, dancing, singing, laughing, being silly, eating good food together. And so for us, like, country is really our greatest co-therapist. It actually encompasses all of these things. It incorporates movement, it incorporates mind, positive interactions with each other. And so for us, our healing looks like being on country with community, away from the noise and the stress of all of the load of the colony and all that labor that's expected of us.
Caroline, thank you so much. My goodness, there are just some absolutely wise, beautiful and potent tips there. And I'd love to add in another one, if I may.
Yes.
It's something we spoke about earlier, because I know for me it was something that went very pear-shaped when I experienced burnout, and that is, everyone, your sleep.
Yeah.
You have to, whoa.
Yeah.
I'm just going to slip that one right in there at the end, is that the quality of your sleep is in direct proportion to the quality of life that you are experiencing. Take your sleep seriously. And if there is anything that's happening, whether it's burnout or let's just talk about general health otherwise, that is impeding on that in some way, please look into getting that lovingly addressed for yourself, because as a coach, your ability to be able to be present, focused, giving, boundaried, loving, supportive, all of those things, they are dependent upon all of those things that Caroline has just mentioned. But if you are tired, if you are exhausted, if you are not sleeping well consistently on an ongoing basis, wow, is that going to burn? It's going to burn really badly. So don't forget that one as well. Caroline, thank you so much for being here with us today. I am in such deep awe and respect of the work that you do at Blak Wattle Coaching and Consulting. Thank you for everything today. It's been wonderful to chat with you.
Oh, it's always such a pleasure, Julie. Always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. And if you would like to learn more about Caroline and her incredible work, please do go to the podcast section of our website. And everyone, take good care of yourself out there. We need you firing in not a burned out way, but a lit up way to do this incredible work.